to hack his own biology. He lost 100 pounds without calorie counting or excessive exercise. He used techniques to upgrade his brain by more than 20 IQ points, lowered his biological age while learning to sleep more efficiently in less time. I always love hearing about his different experiments and hacks to really push the envelope. Private brain, EEG tests, remote monasteries in Tibet. Dave, it is always fun to talk with you. How are you?
I'm great, John. It's been really cool to get to know you over the past 3 or so years. We first had dinner in New York a long time ago, and you always send me to the best paleo restaurants in New York. Every time I'm there, I text you, and so thanks, man.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's good when you come through here. It's amazing to watch this whole ancestral health, biohacking, paleo, these sort of somewhat overlapping, somewhat different fields taken off over the last few years.
It's really cool because I'm a big supporter of the paleo principles, and it's funny. Like, one of the things that I'd consider as a biohacking thing is the yellow glasses that help you sleep better, and those have become popular in paleo. And that's certainly cavemen didn't have yellow glasses, but they also didn't have electric light. So the whole concept of biohacking is how do you change the environment around you to increase your performance? But it's not limited to what would we have done ancestrally? Although, God, there's a lot of pathways there we should take advantage of. But what do we do to kick more ass? So there's I run electrical currents over my body with alarming regularity, and that's totally not paleo, but it's like that other side of biohacking. And it all comes together, though, because if you draw a Venn diagram, I think we have this beautiful thing in the middle where it's compliant with all of them, and you can go in any direction that appeals to you, and all of them are going to be better than what you're doing today.
Well, and one of the ways paleo is misunderstood frequently in the press is people wanting to return to the wild and exactly lead that lifestyle. That's not what I do. I want to take the best of the old with the best of the new and craft a modern, healthy life in the modern world that allows me to flourish.
Flourishing is a great word, and maybe one I should use more often. Because that's what it's about. It's not about even just performing better, even though that's the typical audience that people come to me for executive coaching and all. But flourishing means whatever it is you're doing, even if it's not a performance-oriented entrepreneurial thing or athletic thing. But you can flourish as an artist. You can flourish as whatever it is you do.
Well, and so that's a good segue into our topic today, which is high performance flourishing in whatever field people are in. You've got a coaching service. You consult with high performance people in a lot of different fields. Tell us about that, and then let's start to talk about some of the different unique challenges that high performance people face in their daily lives.
So my career in Silicon Valley has had me spend time at a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road, looking at companies. I've run strategy for a couple of companies with billions of dollars in revenue. What I've found is amongst those high-pressure CEO types, company founders, is that there's a lot of type A personality thing, and there's an enormous amount of stress. There's a book that's worth reading called The Corporate Athlete. And the point of the book is that pro athletes will train, and they'll train, and then they recover. So let's see, I ran for a while, then I slept, and I ate a lot, and then I slept some more, and I took 2 naps, and then I spent the evening watching movies, and then I did it again. When you're an entrepreneur, or even just trying to build your career at a big company, but when you're in that career growth mode, what do? You work, and it never stops. You wake up the next day, and there's more email, and you do it, and so you just grind, and you grind for years, and it affects you. The types of clients who come to me, and I'm a CEO myself. I have 2 young children, so I do about 4 hours of coaching a week, and that's it. When I work with someone, it's typically a CEO, maybe a big a hedge fund manager, stock trader, entrepreneur, CEO, kind of that perspective, and sometimes recording artists. There's a couple Grammy, Billboard. I don't know if there are Grammys. One of them is, but a Billboard ranked recording artists who are super bulletproof. Because one of the things that kicks your ass is going on tour. So literally this week, I was in Portland with Third Eye Blind, and they drink bulletproof coffee before a show. And we just read that the Los Angeles Lakers drink bulletproof coffee. And I suppose that's not strictly paleo because, we didn't have coffee, and there's still debate about coffee. But what I do know is that, that specific combination there of particularly the brain octane flavor of coconut oil, which also you couldn't do as a caveman because it's 4% of what's in coconut oil, and it's hard to pick out that 4%, using your fingers. But
I think you enjoy being different than the caveman. I think you're taking a little pleasure out of that.
I am, man, and I love cavemen. In fact, I'm 4% caveman genetically. I tested that. Also using technology that we didn't have in caves. No, I'm kidding. But the important thing there is that, okay, you want to kick ass on the basketball court with all these cameras on you? Yes. You want to kick ass on stage with all the fans around you? Yes. So guys like that are making the decision to use a specific performance-enhancing recipe. And I end up doing some coaching with them, and the first question that I hear from, the big guys is, I'm stressed. Or, even worse, I'm not stressed. When they say they're not stressed, and this was me, if you go back 15 years, there's no reason to be stressed, therefore I'm not stressed. Okay, classic rational perspective, because they don't understand the evolutionary development of your nervous system and brain. The model that I use to explain this is really helpful for anyone on paleo, because you have your brainstem, your reptilian brain, and you share this with snakes. And it's going to keep some of your systems running, and it's there as the lowest level, like the firmware, if you're a computer guy, the lowest level of your body. On top of that, you have your mammalian brain layered in. And this is kind of like the operating system in your computer. The mammalian brain has these rules in it, and these rules are largely set before you're 7 years old. And they're there to keep your meat alive. They have nothing to do with your conscious brain.
What a romantic way to look at it.
Totally. Like you big walking slab of protein, actually
right.
Fat, water, and then protein, depending on who you are. And it's really funny because it makes sense. I call this the Labrador brain, actually, because that's my favorite mammal in terms of human behavior. If you're a Labrador, think about your behaviors like someone throws a stick, you're like, ooh, a stick, I'll go get it. There's your distractibility, ADD kind of behavior. Okay, that's the part of my brain that won't stay focused because, what is that? What is that? What is that? And then what comes next in a Labrador? Oh, look, cat poop. I think I'll eat that, right? So Labradors will eat anything. Well, are you one of those guys who sits in a conference room, looks at the plate of cookies, which are full of bad oils and gluten, and sugar, and high fructose corn syrup, and some preservatives, and then you're like, oh, I know I shouldn't eat that, but I just did. Right? Okay. Well, I felt good for 2 minutes. Yes. And then felt worse. And that's your Labrador, wolfing it down, right? Because something got in the way, because you told yourself you're going to eat a cookie today, and then you did. Well, there you go. That's your mammal brain doing its thing. And what's the other behavior that Labradors have? Look, there's a leg. I'll go hump it. Okay. Those 3 behaviors are the human behaviors that get in our way, and they're all evolutionary behaviors, right?
Deeply, deeply wired.
And if you think of a deer, there's a simple rule that a deer has. Hear a noise, freeze. Hear another noise, run away. The deer doesn't stop to think, and neither do you. And that's what's getting in the way. And this is where I go with my coaching people. If they think they're not stressed, then the vast majority of the time, unless they have some deep meditation practice and they're, a very unusual guy or woman, what's going on there is they are basically unaware of the level of stress they have. And then we start using technologies to show them their stress in terms of flashing lights and oh, I guess I am stressed. And that opens up the ability to hack the stress.
What do you mean flashing lights?
Well, one of the technologies that I use is called HRV Sense. This is an app that I created, and there's a free version called Food Sense that's out there. And it uses a heart rate monitor. You'll need to do it for about a week. And it'll track your stress all day long based on the spacing between your heartbeats. Because when your Labrador brain is in charge, your fight or flight response is in charge. So what happens there is the spacing between your heartbeat changes to show sympathetic dominance. So one of the technologies is that one, HRV, as in heart rate variability sense, as in it makes sense. And then The other thing that I'll do is I'll use something called the inner balance sensor from the HeartMath Institute. I'm an advisor to the HeartMath Institute, and I carry both of these things on upgradedself.com, my store. Not to plug too heavily here, just that's where to get it.
Okay, yeah.
And what's cool about this thing, the Inner Balance Trainer, is that it teaches you to consciously turn off the Labrador brain. So whether you're a pro athlete, whether you're a CEO, whenever your Labrador brain pops up, if you're not aware that it's popping up, then you're not going to have the ability to turn on your conscious brain. Because we haven't talked about that. We talked about reptile, we talked about mammal, and then there's the prefrontal cortex, the human part of your brain. And what you want to do to be the highest performing person possible is to allow the meat operating system, the Labrador brain, to do the things that keep you alive. Because some of them are important, like touch a hot plate, like a burner on the stove. You'll jerk your hand away instead of going, wow, I smell burning. I wonder if there's heat here. Oh, there is heat. Oh, look, I'm burning. I better pull my hand away, right? It doesn't work like that. You're going to fall off a cliff. Something in you will grab you and jerk you away from the cliff. And it's not you. It's your mammal operating system.
Things that are deemed too important to leave up to your conscious brain.
Yeah, things like tigers eating you, that whole kind of starving to death, not reproducing the species, all of those are not up to your human brain unless you've trained your mammal brain or your Labrador brain to sit and roll over and beg when it's supposed to. And when you do that, and also it has to have its basic requirements met, but when you do that, your ability to perform skyrockets because of this thing called willpower. We used to think willpower, like Ayn Rand style, I'm going to just force it through sheer will. It's bull, you know what? I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, and I don't usually swear on my own podcast, so it's bull bleep. And
it's okay. You can swear. We'll bleep it out. It'll sound cool.
All right, there you go. Well, you can bleep my bleep.
Yeah.
So what happens with willpower is that, and this is also kind of not a paleo concept, but your willpower is limited. You have so much every day you can use, and then it's gone. So you can waste it, or you can use it to change the world. And my mission is to use it to change the world, to help people learn how to be healthier, because I had spent so much time and money getting my own health back because I was so sick when I was young and fat and all that stuff. So I'm using my willpower there. What I'm not using it on is sitting at a table and looking at a bagel and saying, no, no, no. Because if my nervous system is untrained, that bagel is going to say, eat me. And I'll say, no, eat me, no. And literally, just in 1 hour meeting in some conference room somewhere, half my willpower for the day is gone. And then the next meeting, there's a plate of cookies. And then I'm like, I'll just have one. And the way it will manifest itself isn't as me laying down and surrendering. It'll be me convincing myself that there's a perfectly rational, good reason to eat that damn toxic cookie. And there isn't a rational reason, but my meat operating system just hijacked my human brain and made me think there was a rational reason.
Yeah. Oh, it's the holidays. Oh, I worked out earlier today.
Yeah, I deserve it. It's been a hard day.
I need to be polite here because they offered it to me.
And this whole dynamic, it's kind of outside the normal discussion that we might have in paleo. But when you eat paleo, or if you eat the bulletproof diet, which is I'd say paleo is increasingly becoming similar to this in terms of some of the tweaks, which I'm really eager to hear the rest of the things you've recorded. You've told me about some of these. And I'm super excited when we get into the nuances of starch and endurance training and things like that. So what I'm looking for is the most optimal, given the entire universe of possibilities, regardless of whether our ancestors did them. If it works, it probably triggered an ancestral pathway, and it's awesome. So we look at all these different things, and we look at, all right, what's going to make us perform better? And number one, before even anything you eat, is stop wasting willpower and you'll perform better. Right? With my coaching clients and just with people who come to the blog and listen to the Bulletproof podcast, by the way, we hit #1 ranked. We beat The Biggest Loser, the first high fat, low carb podcast to beat Jillian Michaels on iTunes. Woohoo, Bulletproof Radio.
Congratulations.
So, by the way, Biggest Loser makes me so sad because having been a fat ass for half my life, to look at these like fat people wasting the willpower, chasing Cheetos on a stick or whatever they do on the show, like people lose. I had lots of people lose like 100 pounds using primarily bulletproof coffee as a way to satiate themselves and to trigger their ketosis. And then it's like, well, there was no crying, there was not even a lot of exercise. They just kind of like melted.
And dietaries in general, body composition is so closely tied to diet, and it's all calories in, calories out on The Biggest Loser.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing they don't do on that show, which really I don't like, is that every participant on the show is on a bunch of meds, has other ancillary health issues that they're not talking about, and a lot of those issues are not being resolved. And in fact, many of them may be getting worse. They've heard reports of people spitting up blood or having all sorts of digestive problems. It's a little scary.
And honestly, if you're doing a rapid weight loss regimen, any of them, including like the rapid fat loss protocol that I put together, like it says in big letters, warning, like this is dangerous. Like you should do the other one where you lose only a half a pound a day if it's working right, versus like a pound a day. But then again, if you're trying to cut weight or you have a part in a movie that's coming up and you need to look a certain way, okay, you want to dump fast, then you got to look at the toxins. If you biopsy fat from a normal fat human, the number of pesticides, things like heavy metals, and other toxins that are in the fat, like you can die if you lose weight too fast because you dump all of the toxins from your fat. And when I'm working with coaching clients or just giving advice for free on the site, the way I look at this is there's always trade-offs, and toxin binding is something that's also pretty darn important, as well as not taking in toxins, including some toxins that are largely allowed in paleo circles. You'll find that Rob Wolf and Mark Sisson and Chris Kresser and guys like that have all at one time or another written about some of the same things that I covered in the Better Baby book, the book about what you eat before you get pregnant to have healthier babies, and what are on the Bulletproof diet. Things like lectins in food, the little proteins that stick to the sugars that line your cells and line other parts of your body, that are anti-nutrients, natural pesticides that are in foods. Things like that are really important, but when you're dumping fat out of your body, it's actually a lot of the industrial man-made things, as well as maybe some of the mold toxin-derived xenoestrogens that are particularly impactful for you. And the way you bind those things is coconut charcoal, which is, funny enough, also something that I have on Upgraded Self. So I look at how do I bind stuff in the gut so that it doesn't even have to be absorbed by the body? How do I bind stuff that the body's trying to excrete through the gut or through the liver or through the kidneys? And then how do I turn up the function of my kidneys? How do I turn up the function of my liver? And frankly, if you want to be a highly resilient human in the modern world, you might want to consider that you don't get all your nutrition from food. And this is also not always a paleo kind of thing. Okay, I have bottles of liver powder from grass-fed animals behind me. My hydrolyzed collagen from grass-fed cows, called upgraded collagen, is something I take on most days. Like I'm into whole foods. I eat an incredibly nutrient-dense diet. I also take a fistful of pills a couple times a day, and those are all super high-quality vitamins. Why do I do that? Because you should only get all of your nutrients from Mother Nature if you get all your toxins from Mother Nature. And sorry, John, you live in New York. The number of toxins that you get walking down the street, breathing whatever's in the air, and just through living. And me, I fly all the time. I was on 4 or 5 flights this week, and I know I breathe jet fuel. I know that I was covered with BPA.
Well, that was for fun. That was at the party.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually replaced Red Bull as the new drink. It's just jet fuel, right? By the way, jet fuel does not taste good in bulletproof coffee. So these kinds of things are affecting you, and so you got to look at your primary detox pathways and see what's happening. And that's one of the things that maybe we can talk about today, is our primary detox pathways. We talked about binding stuff in the gut using the coconut charcoal, but when I work with clients, and just from reading the forums on Bulletproof Exec, most people within 6 weeks of going on the Bulletproof diet, specifically avoiding some of the mold toxins that are kind of hidden causes of inflammation that are harder to, you don't know if they're in your food or not, so you need to find other sources of determining the quality of your food. When I work with people like that, in 6 weeks, their inflammation markers usually drop dramatically. So that's a typical response. So homocysteine, C-reactive protein, and the one that I think is most important for people is LP-PLA2. This is a protein that's made when there's damage to the lining of your vascular system. So I don't believe cholesterol is harmful. I believe that excessive oxidized cholesterol is not a great thing to have, but if you don't overcook your food, you shouldn't be getting a lot of oxidized cholesterol in your body. So what about the small percentage of people who still have problems with homocysteine or C-reactive protein? What I found to a T in those people is that if I ask them to do a 23andMe genetic human genome test and then run that through algorithms that can show them how their detox pathways work, there's almost always a problem with detox pathways. One of them is one that's involved in methylation. And methylation is terribly important because roundabout a third of people, don't handle folic acid well. In fact, it causes gunk to build up in their detoxification cycles. And when that happens, by the way, I'm one of those. When that happens, if I take a supplement, or even worse, a federally supplemented food with folic acid in it, it removes my ability to detoxify other things. So yes, I avoid folic acid, but I take methylfolate or folinic acid, which are forms that don't require that detox step. How would I know that? Well, because I looked at my genetic profile and I can see my weaknesses. Before we had this, we could only look at things like urine organic acids and whatnot. So I would encourage you, once it's legal again, to get your 23andMe testing done so that you can understand what your detox pathways look like, particularly if you're on the bulletproof diet, if you're doing paleo, if you're doing a specific exercise regimen, anything with the intent of getting yourself to a more normal body weight and to get rid of brain fog and all the health. If it's not working, or if you get your blood test and your inflammation's high and you don't know why and you've sort of been good, first we'll look at sleep. And if you're getting enough quality sleep, what's next? Well, what's next is let's look at how your body handles these things. And you may need to turn up your glutathione. And for me, that's something that's terribly important. I used to have ADD. I had all the symptoms of Asperger's syndrome, including like oppositional defiant disorder, OCD when I was younger. Like, it wasn't like super bad OCD, but I would have like face scrunching. I have to like scrunch my nose 3 times, and I couldn't serve a volleyball without bouncing it like a specific number of times. Like these weird obsessive behaviors.
Did anyone call you Dave Aspie?
I might have been called that, but usually it was ass spray. 7th grade.
There you go. Oh, 7th grade.
And it's like all these things. Gluten was a major problem. Trans fats, MSG, all those. But I'm a delicate flower from a metabolic perspective, and being aware of those detox pathways, I know that when I take glutathione, that I benefit. And I used to inject this stuff. You actually take IVs of glutathione. Glutathione is the primary detoxification enzyme in the body, and the liver uses it very importantly, but it's in all of your cells, and your brain loves it. One of my friends, Alberto Villotto, who's a cultural anthropologist and a trained shaman who trained in Peru for many years in the jungle, he also uses intravenous glutathione to enhance his meditation practice. And who would have thought that a modern day historically based shaman would be using biochemistry techniques like that to increase his shamanic performance, but he does. What I did is I went out and I formulated a kind of glutathione that can go through the gut lining differently than anything else, and that's what I use. And I take that stuff. It comes in little syringes that you just squirt in the back of your mouth, and it raises your levels of glutathione, and that lets you handle things like jet fuel and things like other toxins that you're exposed to. So I'm trying to hey liver, let me help you out a bit here, buddy, because even if I live in a beautiful part of the world. I have sheep from a half mile from my house that are only grass-fed, raised by a woman named Judy. My beef comes from half of a cow, and I know the guy who raised the cow. He has 300 of them, and they only eat grass, and I can look at them. So I'm pretty precise. If you follow the bulletproof stuff, people call me anal sometimes. I'm like, hey, I just want to know what the very best is, and if it's convenient, I'll do that. And if it's not convenient, I'll get as close to that as I can for the amount of time and money I have. Right. And that's the practical way of living. That said, I'm on airplanes all the time. I eat sometimes all day long. I got some vegetables that are probably irradiated and microwaved, and I took some grass-fed butter with me on the airplane, and I smeared them on these subpar vegetables, and had some protein powder, and woohoo, that wasn't a great day. But what am I going to do? I'm going to keep my detox pathways running, and that's important.
So in terms of, let's talk about willpower again, because If people are stressed out, if they are wasting their willpower on resisting certain foods, how do you train that mammalian brain to not be wasting willpower on decisions that aren't very productive?
There's a training, and then there's what do you do with your environment. And let's talk about the environment before we talk about the training, because it's such a big thing.
Yeah.
The number one most important thing I've ever found is brain octane oil, which is that 4% of coconut oil extract. And yeah, it's something that I make, and it's more purified than MCT oil, which itself is 6 times stronger than coconut oil. So if you created a hierarchy, there's coconut oil, which has a bunch of stuff in it, and then there's MCT oil, which is anywhere between 15 and 62% of what's in coconut oil, depending on how you define MCT oil. And then from there, you get to this brain octane oil, which is just 4% that we extract. And we esterify it as well, so it's more absorbable. The reason you want to do this is the oil that turns into ketones fastest. So it takes about 26 steps, say, for sugar to turn into glucose, to turn into ATP. So you eat the sugar, and 26 Krebs cycle steps later, you've got some energy. You take brain octane, 3 cycles later, it turns into ATP. And we just discovered this. In fact, on one of my very recent podcasts, we just kind of covered this in detail. There's a new study that showed that the brain preferentially uses ketone above glucose. Throughout history, we've always said the brain needs glucose. Well, it turns out BS. The brain does need glucose, I think, but it doesn't need that much, and it prefers ketones. And the fastest way I know to get ketones in is brain octane. Even in the presence of carbs, you'll still have some floating around. And when you do that, you turn off your starving nature in your brain. So if the brain feels it's starving, if your meat operating system's like, I'm out of energy, you are going to waste willpower no matter what you do. You get your fat intake up, use your grass-fed butter, and very importantly, that brain octane stuff, when you do it, all of a sudden, you're like, you know what? The cravings went away. And one of my clients works for a big investment bank in the UK. She has no food in her house because she has such severe food cravings. And she walks around the office, and she knows everyone who has a drawer full of candy, and she has a little map of it, and she's like, oh, just have one piece, a little Jolly Rancher or whatever. So
what a miserable existence.
It's terrible, and she kind of doesn't like herself because of this, because she's so tortured by it. She consciously, her human brain's like, don't do that, and her meat operating system hijacks her, and so she's burning her willpower out and just stressed by the whole thing. So she tried Bulletproof Coffee, which, funny enough, has brain octane and butter in it and nothing else. And she called me. She's like, oh, my God, I went all morning without even wanting candy. It was gone. So what a willpower hack that was. She might have used 1,000 decisions that morning on saying no to candy and then eating it anyway. And all of a sudden, she's like, I didn't think about it. And that not thinking about it, because you've satiated, you've fed the Labrador in your head the right way. And then you're like, okay, now I can relax, and now I can start making human-level decisions because the part of me doesn't think it's starving. The next thing you do is you do this heart rate variability training using the inner balance sensor that's on Upgraded Self, or using the HRV Sense app to just track how you get stressed. Do I get stressed before lunch? Do I get stressed in meetings with my boss? Is it traffic that stresses me? If you know the things that are causing the most biological stress, not, oh, I should be stressed now, but irrational, weird, kind of cloudy stress. If you can figure those things out, you can play whack-a-mole with them. And every time it pops up, there's a feeling. It's in your chest. It's actually not even in your brain. And you feel it. Sometimes in your gut, but usually it's around your heart. Mm-hmm. And it's a trainable. And with these things, your iPhone or this other little device called an M-Wave that's also on Upgraded Self, it has a light on it, and it'll turn red when you're in fight or flight mode. And then you're like, okay, I'll try breathing this way. I'll try thinking about this. And suddenly you realize that there is a skill inside your body. And this is one I'm a certified coach in this. And it's one I use with the executives I coach. It's a skill you can teach. And it would just take years and years of meditation to learn the skill. Or you can just hack it. And this is where biohacking comes in. You get real-time feedback, and you're like, oh, the light turned green. Whatever I just did was right, and the light turned red. Whatever I just did was wrong. So you shortcut years of just sitting there with your eyes closed going, what's happening now? And you realize, well, I don't really care what's happening now. I only care what's happening when it turns red or green. And your learning curve is so fast. It's amazing. And then all of a sudden, you're sitting there in a meeting, and yeah, you might, there's some food, and I guess I didn't eat enough brain octane this morning. I have food cravings. Number one, you recognize the food cravings, but number two, you're able to shortcut what happens in the brain because you've done this kind of fight or flight response. And here's how that works, John. And it's really cool stuff, and it's kind of outside the norm for most people to know this. When something happens in the environment around you, there's two paths in the brain. One of them we call the fast path. And this is the part of your brain that makes you pull your hand away from that hot stove before you think about it. It's emotional processing. And then and you do that when you're in fight or flight mode, when your sympathetic nervous system is dominant, which it is most of the time for most people who live in the modern world. It shouldn't be, by the way. When your parasympathetic nervous system is in balance, which you can determine using heart rate variability, then you can actually use the slow path of processing, which means you take this environmental input and you run it through your logic processing, not your emotional processing, or ideally through both is what happens. But you accept the emotional input, but you don't act on it. And this is the difference between action and reaction. So if you see the bagel, you react to the bagel, you burn willpower, and you either eat the bagel or you don't. But if you trained yourself to know when you're being reactive and to know when you're in fight or flight starvation mode, all of a sudden the bagel becomes a conscious choice again, and it wasn't before. And I mean, this is number one. Eat the paleo diet. Eat bulletproof. Eat lots of fat, and the kind of fat that makes you thin, not the kind of fat that makes you fat. And by the way, I hope it's okay if I plug bulletproofdietbook.com. We're launching the book sometime in the next 6 months or so. If you want to get the infographic, you want to get the first chapter and all, please go there. It's free. Just give me your email so I can email you when the book comes out. And it's really good content. Like the infographic is revamped. So anyway, eat something like that. Eat what John tells you to eat. Eat what Mark and Rob and the other, I don't know, are they? Can we call them the Paleo Mafia? Paleo Godfathers? Like what's the right word?
Mafia sounds a little negative. Let's.
Mafia is too negative. Yeah, leaders is too boring. Illuminati, the Paleo Illuminati. I have no idea. Anyway, the Paleo learned people, the ones whose blogs I read and respect, there's a lot of commonality in the recommendations here. So eat those types of things and make the small tweaks that cause less stress in your system. And seriously, if you're listening to this, you're into these things, consider monitoring the stress in your system using an external device like a biohacker like me would do, say HRV Sense. Or even, let's talk about a free app people can use. This is cool, John, for people who are listening to this. And it doesn't cost anything, so it's extra cool. It's an app called Food Sense. And what this app does is it gets a baseline heart rate in the morning, and you can do it with a sensor on your phone, or you can type in your heart rate, whichever one you want, and then you do it before you eat. Then you eat, and you check your heart rate a couple times after you eat. And if you ate a food that you're sensitive to, then your heart rate is going to go up very predictably. So what you'll find is, it asks you, what are the ingredients in the food you ate? If you do this for a couple weeks, it'll tell you, in that meal, you ate something that was like kryptonite for you. And in the next meal, you didn't, because your heart rate changed predictably. It is called the Dr. Broca test, and it's been known for like 25 years, but it's not usually tracked because it's too much work, and it's an old way of detecting food insensitivities, including, or food sensitivities, whichever way, they're kind of the same thing, half full, half empty. But what will happen here is pretty soon you realize every time you eat that food, gluten, or whatever else, maybe eggs, maybe you're allergic to eggs, whatever it is, if you do figure out what that is, what you're going to do is you're going to end up saving willpower. Because let me tell you, when you eat something you're allergic to, it messes with your brain and it gives you food cravings. So you ate something like that, you're like, wow, I'm really tired and foggy, I think I'll have some sugar. Because why? Your body wants glucose to try and deal with a metabolic problem that came from an immune reaction to your food. Those sorts of things are like hidden gems that are available for people. It's not that hard to do it. You can also get a blood test. I encourage all of my executive coaching clients to get an IgE food panel. You might as well just have a lab tell you, crab isn't good for you. Like, it might taste good dipped in butter, but like for your system, like, just steer clear. That is precious knowledge. Because what if every morning you were eating eggs and they're what mess you up? Like, how would you know?
Yeah, how you start your day. Well, and this is very similar to when some people simply try to fast, and they may have some hidden micronutrient deficiency that makes it difficult for them to not eat for a while. They're still feeling the cravings. They're still feeling hungry.
Good point. In fact, so many people have that problem that I came up, even for my own use, I was doing intermittent fasting, but it's fine if you're, an athlete or you have a relatively unstructured day. When I was working in Silicon Valley, okay, you're in your meetings at 8 and you start, working. You need to have your brain turned on at 11, at noon, at 1, but you haven't eaten for like 16, 17 hours, and people tend to get a little cold and get a little distracted, and that didn't work for me. And that's why the bulletproof intermittent fasting idea came up, where take the brain octane, a little bit of butter, have the mold-free coffee beans, and when you do that in the morning, you still have 0 protein and 0 glucose in the body, so you don't turn on those digestive pathways, but you get the energy from the ketones, so you can power through that thing. I needed to do that myself, and it makes the practice of fasting work for a business person or for someone who's going to be on an airplane, rather than someone who's like, all right, I know I'll be a little tired, then I'll just schedule a light activity around 11. I'm like, oh, sorry, that was the board meeting. I kind of needed to have my brain on then. So consider that fat alone has a very different metabolic effect than protein or glucose, and all of them have different metabolic effects, and even each type of sugar and each type of fat and each type of protein are different, and that's one of the reasons that I present them differently on the Bulletproof Diet infographic. They're stack ranked as less inflammatory, more inflammatory, and that's pretty important to know too, because sometimes you don't get the food that was ideal for you, but you can at least pick one that was less harmful than the hot dog at 7-Eleven.
You're familiar, I think, with some of the findings that if you have glucose, then it restores some of your willpower. I know that there's the book by Roy Baumeister and John Tierney called Willpower, and that's one of the things they highlight. So is that one of those situations where your brain is feeling depleted and people then go for glucose, but it's for people that are... Is this finding... I mean, I'm sure this study was done on people that were more carb diets.
Let me be really as polite as I can. The study is wonderful and amazing because it's about willpower. It's also done from a metabolically ignorant perspective. And I don't mean to insult people by saying metabolically ignorant. You look at the set of assumptions there, and if you're measuring willpower and you're not looking at the metabolic state of the people, and you're not even looking at the biochemistry there. We know the brain wants ketones first. So what I interpret that to mean, and in my own life, this is a profoundly important thing. It's not glucose or fat, it's ATP. When you have more energy in the body that you can use, when I say energy, I mean more ATP, you have more willpower. And if you don't believe me, go out there and buy some ATP. It's quite expensive, and it doesn't absorb that well, but just take half a bottle of ATP and see how much willpower you have. And you'll be like, I have enough willpower to bench press this refrigerator right now full of meat, right? And this is the source of willpower. It is energy in the body. And this is also why when I go to a little raw vegan restaurant, and I go to those sometimes, and they serve me a 50-calorie, low-fat salad thing, it actually pisses me off, because when you eat like that, you are sucking your willpower dry. There is not enough fuel there for you to have the energy that you should have, and when you don't have enough willpower, the first thing you do is you stop using your conscious brain, and you start acting from your mammalian brain. And that means that you flip off the guy in front of you in traffic, and you're cranky to your family, and you're basically an asshole. This is what happens when there's not enough energy in the brain. I'm like that. I grew up without a lot of energy in my brain. I was fat, but I was metabolically damaged, basically. So this is why eating properly, eating enough calories and enough energy is right, and eating the right calories is important. I think there's a vocabulary problem here that trips a lot of people up, because we talk about this word energy, and it's a very unspecific term. And people will think of it in terms of calories, or just simply putting fuel into, jet fuel into a jet engine. But it's all intermediated by hormones and our metabolism, and what our metabolism can specifically convert into usable sources of energy, which is a very different concept than just this magical notion of energy flying around, or just you could just eat lettuce and have it turn into energy somehow.
It's a tricky concept to sort of discuss in an accurate way.
It is, and calories have done enormous damage overall because we focus on that calories in, calories out. At the same time, there is a set amount of energy you need per day, but it is not fair to say that a protein calorie is the same as a fat calorie, because the protein caused your liver to do a bunch of work. It had a bunch of breakdown byproducts, and if you had too much of that protein, it probably screwed you up. You got your ammonia levels up high, which then created food cravings because you need more detoxification ATP, right? So it's a very complex system, and calories don't work very well. But if you don't have enough of the stuff that's going to make energy in your brain, your willpower is going to be damaged. Those study authors figured out glucose is a source of energy in the brain, and that when you do add more energy to the brain, you get more willpower. Amen. But if I opened up my vitamin cabinet here and I showed you all the stuff I do for my mitochondria, oh, by the way, mitochondria create ATP, or they recycle ATP in the body for people who aren't biochemists and all that. I do everything humanly possible to make my mitochondria totally grow. In fact, people may be familiar with Terry Wall's work on minding my mitochondria. Terry's a friend, and I love sitting down and having lunch with her because she cured her neurodegenerative disease using a super high-fat diet. She actually uses the bulletproof glutathione force and the brain octane oil.
And she had MS, for people who haven't heard of her, right?
Yeah, she had MS. She's a physician. She was wheelchair-bound, and she's given a TED Talk to 1.5 million people listen to. And it's amazing when you see her because, her brain's fully on. She's walking around. She's a perfectly functional person who brought herself back from the brink using a diet that is pretty darn paleo-ish, but maybe tweaked a little bit. And she also looks out for the specific toxins in foods. In fact, I would say her work and mine have the most similarities of anything I've ever seen. And I was, unaware of her work, and we kind of sat down like, oh my God, we kind of do the same things here. So that's just another example of what you can do when you have the right fats and the right everything else.
So we were talking about stress. Have you, in your coaching and your own use of the HRV Sense app, have you found any sort of odd sources of stress that people would never expect to be causing them stress, but do? Or what are some of the reliable causes of stress that people...
Yeah, here's one that you probably wouldn't know is as big as it is, and it's driving. When I first started monitoring my stress, I would, put the little stress monitor that's connected to my heart rate on the dashboard, and I drive. Every time someone cuts you off, you will go into fight or flight mode. And by the way, that's fight mode, not flight mode. I'll kill that guy. And when you drive around like that for a couple of weeks, constantly getting a signal of where your nervous system is, you realize how many times you want to kill people every day unconsciously. You don't think about killing the guy. You might think, but what you felt was like a twinge in your gut. This is your mammal brain misbehaving. And I do, with some of my clients, I go through this program called 40 Years of Zen, and I go through it with them most of the time. Sometimes they go without me. And we train you to see your own brain waves. And this is where you get the sort of Zen state. Literally, someone who's done Zen training for between 21 and 40 years has a certain brain pattern. And you can get the same brain pattern in 7 days. So I've done that multiple times because of the work with clients. And that is another level beyond heart rate variability training. But at that point, you become aware that not only did your nervous system want to kill the guy, but there's subconscious thoughts that are super violent in there. And most people, they're kind of below the surface. And when you learn how to peer into your own thoughts, you go, oh my God, all right, I need to get rid of the source of that thought. And this is how you reprogram the MEAT operating system. But the first and most basic, very affordable step for everyone is you'll spend $60 on a heart rate monitor and $5 on HRV Sense, or you'll spend $99 on the inner balance sensor on Upgraded Self, and then okay, at least now something stuck its head above the water, and you're like, okay, that didn't work while I was driving, so I'm going to at least play whack-a-mole. And now you have a process running in your mind to tell you how to push down these stressors. So traffic is one. If you wear the HRV Sense all day long, you can look on your calendar and look at your stress level at different times. Eating is hugely stressful because lots of people eat things that they're allergic to that aren't good for them every day. The meeting with your boss. Or, get this, the meeting with only one of the people who works for you. So what is it about that woman that's pushing your buttons? Or, that guy, are you intimidated? Is he taller than you? Okay, the Labrador in your brain is going to be intimidated by someone who's taller than you. I'm 6'4", I'm actually about 220 now because I've been putting on some muscle lately with electricity. And the interesting thing there is, I intimidate a lot of guys, and it's not conscious. I'm not feeling any negative thoughts, but I'm a foot taller than you, and the ape in us is going to say, So if one of those people is tracking the heart rate variability, it'll probably drop if I'm standing next to them on a train, because some part of them is like, is this guy going to kill me? And it's not a beneficial human behavior, but it's hugely important if you're a meat operating system. Keep the meat alive is all you care about. You don't understand that this is Dave. You don't understand anything because you have no context. So just wearing a stress monitor all day long and going, wow, why did my stress do that now, will teach you more about yourself than you ever would think about. And you go beyond that, go to the 40 years of Zen kind of thing, and then see what it does not to your heart, but to your brain, how it suppresses alpha in the rear of your brain, which is like where alpha lives in the brain. And you realize, wow, if I want to not be in a beta, fight or flight kind of reactive state, I need to learn how to be in control of this, because this is my body. Like the body should not control your brain, and most of us, the body does control the brain. When you hack this right, you control your body. The very advanced guys, far beyond where I am, they can control their body to the point, wrap them in the Himalayan winter in wet sheets and they'll dry it out because they have that level of control. I'm not there yet, but I want to be able to dry out cold sheets in windstorms just because it's cool. I don't know that it's a survival skill.
It sounds like it would help people's dating life, too.
Oh, my God. If you can do just the basic inner balance stuff, I tell you, we have studies, and this is a bit airy-fairy stuff, but these are real studies. I know the guys who've done them. And if you have a highly regular variability in your heart rate, this means the spacing between each of your heartbeats is predictable, then what happens is people around you, they'll start to copy yours, and they'll do it unconsciously. And animals, too. One of the coolest studies of all, you walk into a stall with a horse that's used to being ridden. If you're calm and you have a high variability in your heart rate, the horse's heart rate variability will match yours without touching the horse, because we have a magnetic field that extends from the heart. And when I say this isn't like some, the field magical fairyland. This is using very sensitive magnetic detectors. We know it's shaped like a torus, like a donut. It's angled at 8 degrees, and it's measurable about 2 feet out from a human. We also know that magnetic fields extend beyond that. They're just too low to measure. So I look at the nervous system and the heart as part of our environmental sensing organs. If you want to date and you want to absolutely kick ass at dating, having the ability to go into a state of high heart rate variability makes the other person, whether they're a man or a woman, feel calm and safe and good in your presence, and they don't know why. And I'll tell you, I've lost track of the number of times I've been on stage in front of more than 100 people talking about the future of cloud computing, talking about upgrading your brain, audiences in the thousands. Every single time in the past, I don't know how many years, 5, 7 years, before I go on stage, I put myself in a state of high heart rate variability. And I teach my clients to do this too. And the reason you do that is because it makes it easy for the audience to connect with you. It makes you appear to be more dynamic, and it takes away your fight or flight response, so there's no stage fright. So I'm sitting there on stage, and granted, I have the 40 years of Zen backing me up here, so there's a lot of cool training I've done. But I can think about what the audience is thinking, I can think about what I'm going to say next, and I can keep talking without saying the word without stopping, without losing my train of thought. And for me, as a guy with ADD previously, and all these other things, I'd walk to the fridge and couldn't remember why I walked to the fridge. Like all these memory problems, it's so smooth and easy, and turning off fight or flight is a part of how you do that.
Well, you see something with, say, Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, and other folks who have done the horse whisperer stuff, where animals are very much attuned to our posture, small changes in where you're looking, body language, energy in general, and they can sense whether you are carrying yourself like the dominant animal in the room very quickly.
They can indeed, and part of that is your heart rate variability, and part of that is your, like you said, your posture and all that, your tone of voice. But if you set your HRV right, your posture changes, and your tone of voice changes, and your feeling of confidence changes. The other thing is, if you want to have high heart rate variability and you want to have that presence, and you're not eating enough fat, you will not have the brain energy to do this. Remember, the brain wants fat more than sugar. So it all comes down to, if you want to be conscious of what's going on in your body, you've got to eat the fat. And funny enough, the inspiration for Bulletproof Coffee came from Tibetan yak butter tea. What do the Tibetans do all day? Meditate, right? And why do they drink yak butter tea, which is basically, they didn't have the benefit of 4% extract coconut oil, and there's no coconuts in Tibet. Hell, there's no trees in Tibet. So what do? They found the best source of fat they could get, and they literally, they treat it as a sacred thing because it's so important nutritionally and culturally for them. So that's what it takes. No sense training your heart rate variability till you're eating right.
So we've got about a few minutes left here. Why don't you tell people about some of the projects that you're working on right now? I know you have a couple of Bulletproof Coffee trucks that are going to be opening in a couple of months. Tell us about some of that.
Well, it turns out I feel like it's kind of easy to make Bulletproof Coffee. There's only 3 ingredients. You need the upgraded coffee beans that are lab tested to not have the level of mold toxins in them that are classical in coffee. There's debate about whether, is that real? I'll just tell you, all of the EU, and most of Southeast Asia have government regulations for the level of one of the toxins I track. Well, you can't sell coffee with more than 5 parts per billion of that toxin in it in those countries. Where do you think it ends up? It ends up in the U.S. because we don't have a regulation for that. So we are getting dirty coffee, and I know dirty coffee affects human performance because we did our own little in-house study, and I'm working on getting ready to publish that. So, wow, that's kind of a big deal. What happens when we look at what this coffee does, and we say, all right, you got to have the right beans, because if you're pumping extra toxins in using fat, it's not going to work. You add butter, you add MCT oil, and it turns out there's many classes of MCT oil, and there's upgraded MCT, and we look at viscosity testing on it and things like that, and I put the ingredients together in a very specific way, and then you need to blend it. So it's basically upgraded coffee beans, brain octane or MCT oil, and grass-fed butter, and people still get it wrong. They float the butter on top, they try and eat a stick of butter and drink a cup of coffee from the corner store and say it doesn't work. Like, the instructions are there for a reason. They're as simple as I can make them. So we have these coffee trucks coming out in LA, a couple of them, and these are going to be full-on bulletproof coffee trucks that have things according to the bulletproof diet. So we'll make the coffee for you from the right beans with all the right ingredients, blend it up. We'll add some other really interesting things to the coffee that can make it essentially like a meal, like a smoothie. And these are opening in March, and after that we have other trucks coming in. And in mid-year there will be a full-on bulletproof coffee shop, first in LA, and then we're opening in some other cities around the US. And the idea here is, I always wanted to be able to go to the corner mass market coffee store and get clean coffee with the right kind of fat in it, and instead what you get is the McFlurry or the Frappuccino, which is like a mishmash of bad oils and honestly coffee that doesn't meet the standards that I have for upgraded coffee, and some high fructose corn syrup, and you wonder why you feel like a zombie. Well, every ingredient in there messed you up, and I want coffee where every ingredient in there upgrades you. And so I'm super stoked to be able to have these trucks moving around in LA, offering this to people so they can see it. And we've also got the full set of bulletproof ingredients now in our first grocery store. It's called Erewhon in Santa Monica, and it's basically nowhere spelled backwards. It's, I would say, the top natural food store in LA. These guys have an actual physician on staff in a white lab coat who tells you what vitamins to buy. And there's brain octane oil, there's upgraded collagen, all the upgraded ingredients are there, and people love it because they can just pick it up. So it's becoming more mainstream, and I just want everyone in the country, everyone on the planet to have access to the types of fats that make their brains work well, because if they do, we'll all be nicer to each other, and then we can be more paleo or less paleo or whatever else, but there'll be less assholes if people drink more bulletproof coffee. It sounds like a big claim, but I'm serious.
Less war. I love it. Well, that's exciting. It's because a lot of people don't take the time to actually make it properly, and if they can walk into a store and just purchase it, it makes it easy for more people.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else you're working on your website? You've got your Bulletproof Diet book coming out in a few months, and people can learn about that at bulletproofexec.com.
They can, but if they go straight to bulletproofdietbook.com, you can get the infographic, which is like months of work to make that thing the way it is, and it's free, and you can print it out, put it on your fridge. It's very different from the old one. The information, there's new info, and it's also just graphically much more useful. So bulletproofdietbook.com is the place to go for that, and I'll ask you for your email address so I can send you an email that says, hey, would you like to get the book? We're going to be doing like a bundled book offering with my cookbook as well, so people will get a lot of value from that. And I'm not known for sending out emails that are not high value, full of knowledge and teachings. Like that's what this is about. The content of Bulletproof Exec is free, and the book won't be free, but it'll be very valuable.
So they won't get hit with generic Viagra supplements, 20% off?
Absolutely not.
Awesome. Well, I wish I had used a couple of these things during my recent book release, because it was the most high-stress period of my life, and a lot of my routines and habits fell apart. And, I wasn't as high performance as I should have been.
There's a certain amount of discipline. Funny enough, there's a willpower word for you there. There's another talk that I gave at a conference. It's called The Augmented Author, and people might want to check that out. You might want to check that out. Just Google for it. And I talked about 10 different biohacking technologies. I don't think I even talked about food in that at all, that you can use as an author. And there's a new book coming out where they interviewed me about that. Like, what do you do to stay high performance? And half the time when I'm writing, there's electrodes on my head, or I've just finished on the Bulletproof Vibe, kind of stimulating my whole vestibular system. You can do these things to just keep your brain on and focused and creative. So I would just offer that as free info for people who are into that writing thing.
Cool. Awesome. Dave, always a pleasure talking with you. Never boring.
John, I can't wait till we hook up again in New York and eat some more of that delicious paleo lasagna thing you turned me on to last time.
All right. Dave Asprey, everyone. Thank you. You can check him out at bulletproofexec.com. Thanks again for another great session of PaleoCon, and be sure to check out the next one.